I'm here to talk about leadership today. And, leadership in any kind, really. So, have you ever found yourself in a leadership position wondering, how do I get these people to do what I need them to do? How much direction do I give them? Why are they not doing the things that we agreed upon? Or what if they don't even like me? This is far more common than you think. And as an organizational psychologist and a researcher, this topic fascinates me. And leadership often feels like you're trying to solve like an endless puzzle. And the easiest way out looks like very simple advice. Well, just lead by example. You go online, be fair. Or I like that one. A good leader must communicate clearly and be transparent. That's it. But what actually happens when you try these strategies? So let's start with lead by example. A good leader leads by example. What if your example is the wrong one? I once worked with a leader, let's call her Tina, and she was fantastic. She was leading a global team. She was very committed. So for her, it was very normal to work long hours, sacrificing weekends, and she would send multiple follow-ups and emails and check-ins with the team. As per my last email. Huh? You know what I'm talking about? But instead of being inspired, the team completely disengaged. And one person later told her, like, Tina, it felt like constant pressure on us to be like you. We didn't like it. So she was leading by example, but it backfired. Instead of engagement, she got an exhausted team. So the truth is, leading by example can sometimes unintentionally set unrealistic expectations with a team, making them feel overwhelmed or inadequate. There's a mismatch. The lesson isn't to abandon completely the idea of leading by example, but first to understand what impacts your example can have on your team. So when we think about this dynamic, we're often looking at people thinking about their actions with their teams. And you got to remember, the same actions that motivate one team might alienate another. So for example, a hard all-in approach might be very well received in a tech startup environment, but it might demotivate a team in, let's say, a government institution where stability and work-life integration are key. If the leader's example is out of sync with what the team values, then the relational bridge starts to crack. What about fairness then? A good leader must be fair. Nothing wrong with this statement, correct? Well, let me tell you about Saeed. I worked with Saeed a while back during a restructuring, and he was an executive. He had this idea that he would allocate all the resources and redistribute responsibilities strictly based on merit because he wanted to be fair. Did the team perceive like that? No, they didn't. Some saw bias, others felt ignored, and Saeed was just frustrated. The ones who saw bias, they felt like the criteria for the merit were a bit skewed and some individuals were being favored. And the ones who felt ignored, they thought that their unique contributions were being overlooked. So he was trying to be fair, but it backfired. Instead of fairness, he got resentment. But why? Because it's more complex than that. See, organizational justice research teaches us that employees value more than just outcomes when they're assessing fairness. They care about the process, how they are treated throughout, is what we call procedural justice. And leaders often think they're being fair when they're focusing on results alone. But fairness fails if people don't feel respected. Okay, what about this one? A good leader must communicate clearly and be transparent. Again, it looks like sound advice, doesn't it? But what happens, for example, in a scenario where you cannot share information with your team? Imagine, for example, in a merger acquisition scenario where I am legally restricted from sharing information with my team. I could even be potentially charged with insider trading if I do. See, transparency in leadership is more than just sharing information. And there's very interesting research out of Harvard Business School showing that what you share is less important than how you explain the gaps, for example. So the explanation behind the transparency or lack thereof, that will make all the difference. I worked with a company in Toronto a while back, and they had this radical approach to transparency. You know what they did? They decided to share every single detail with the employees as decisions were being made because they wanted to be transparent. Did that work? No, it didn't. The constant flow of partial information, instead of leading to trust and transparency, they got a lot of anxiety, a lot of confusion, and in the long run, attrition. So it backfired. My point here is those well-intended advices on leadership often fail because leadership isn't a checklist. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. So you cannot just lead by example, be fair, be transparent, and expect some magic to happen. It doesn't work like that. So whenever we are thinking about leadership, you got to remember that, as in all relational phenomena, leadership can never be fully achieved as a finished product. Why not, you must be thinking? Well, because leadership doesn't exist in isolation. And unlike many people think, leadership isn't about the leader. It's also not about the team. It's about the relational dynamic between them. So leadership is co-created, and it's highly contextual. That's why the checklist doesn't work. So think of it more like a shared space. Now, I learned this the hard way early in my career. I was very young, very naive, and somewhat arrogant, I dare to say. And I was leading a team with two managers that knew the business very well. And I was pitching a big change. And in the meeting, you should have been there. It was beautiful. They were nodding, and they were smiling, and they were offering suggestions. And I felt great. And I thought, that's awesome. We're good to go. Did things go my way? No, it did not. Because when I followed up, objections kept piling up. The goalposts were kept, moving further and further away. There was no progress. I was baffled. I didn't understand. I was the leader, wasn't I? I had the authority to call in those shots. Of course, when I look back, now I understand that leadership is not a function of authority. It's more of a dance of power and trust. So sometimes, yes, the leader holds more power, but sometimes the team has all the leverage. So whenever we think about leadership, you got to remember, especially if you're a new leader to a team, when you are new to a team, you're not stepping into a blank slate. You're entering a space with its own history. So that team, they have a history of past leaders, they have their norms, they have shared experiences, they know their birthdays. And at the same time, you as the leader, you're bringing your own spices to that equation. So you're bringing your values, your preferences, your successes, your failures. So leadership will happen in that intersection between those histories. And this is why no leadership style is universally effective. So you cannot copy that. It's a very unique formula. That's also why leadership can never be taken. It takes time to be earned. Jacinda Ardern is a good example of this. You remember her? She was the former New Zealand Prime Minister. When she took office in 2017, she was very young, very remarkable. Her leadership style was deeply rooted in empathy and inclusiveness, which didn't particularly align with New Zealand political pragmatism. But she earned her leadership credit. And a defining moment in her mandate happened in 2019 during the Christchurch mosque shootings. That was a tragic event. But Jacinda took action. And in 1 month, they wrote, proposed, and passed a bill banning all military-style semi-automatic weapons in a month. So that swift response deeply resonated with New Zealand's culture of unity and care. And she earned more and more credibility with her leadership. But again, you can see it's highly contextual. And those principles, they apply to things beyond just a corporate life or politics. Think about parenting, for example. Good parents know that you gain influence mostly through trust. You cannot impose through control. Have you ever tried to control a teenager? It never works. And research on developmental psychology teaches us that those parents who foster this dialogue, they explain the rationale behind their values, some of their actions and decisions. Now, those kids, they are far more likely to adopt those values as their own without forcing them. So, if anything, you got to remember that above all, leadership is a human relationship phenomena. It happens in and through human relations. That's why it's a shared space and it's co-created. So the next time you're leading a team, and I wish you all do because we do need better leaders, next time you're there, instead of asking yourself, how do I get these people to do what I need them to do? Maybe you should start with, how can I build a relational dynamic that would allow us to succeed together? And be more aware of the formulas. Thank you very much.